everyone. Welcome to the morning show. We're broadcasting on Channel 9 and also live streaming on Port Media's YouTube channel at www.ncmhub.org. Just click on the YouTube icon. It's easy to get there if you prefer to watch that way. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I'm so pleased to welcome today's guests. I've been looking forward to this all week. We have Marla Andrews of West Newbury here. She's going to be talking about her work at a farm sanctuary and why these farm animals deserve our absolute respect and appreciation, and of course, always humane treatment. And then the second half of the show, I'll be welcoming Northern Essex Community College librarian Jenny Fielding. She's going to be here to help us all learn how to think like a fact checker and to sort fact from fiction in our news sources. But let me start with Marla Andrews. Marla, good morning. Welcome. Thank you for coming to the morning show.
Good morning, Mary. Thank you very much for having me on such a beautiful day.
Oh, it's my pleasure, absolutely, to have you here. Marla has a master's degree in humane education and animal welfare, and she works at Unity Farm Sanctuary in Sherborn, Massachusetts. Marla, I wanted to start out by asking you, how did your love for animals develop? Did you grow up with pets or on a farm? And how did you decide that you wanted to dedicate yourself professionally to understanding and safeguarding and educating people about animal welfare?
Yes, well, for as long as I can remember, I felt a deep connection to animals and a true calling to help them. I think of it as a calling like the clergy must have, or somebody who's called to medicine or maybe working with children, but it truly defines the core of who I am. It's always been that way. I also need to be physically around animals to feel whole. I remember being a little and being slightly obsessed with squirrels and pigeons. I think all of our 35 millimeter films had me feeding just those animals. But I actually grew up in Peabody and I did not have many pets. My father brought us home an orphan baby rabbit that we had for a very short while when I was about 6 or 7. But mostly I shared my childhood with only one little fluffy dog named Coco. And I had her in my life from 3rd grade all the way past college. And
Oh
she was a little,
my.
yeah, I know,
That's a
how
long
lucky
time.
can
That's
you be?
great.
Mhm. But she was a Lhasa Apso, so not even particularly popular or even overly affectionate at back then. But I loved her so deeply and completely. And also for a short time, we had taken in a badly abused Afghan hound, but rehomed her. So I always felt a very deep connection to the animals that came through my life. And when I was about 10, I started reading topics, everything I could get my hands on about animal welfare issues, things like pet overpopulation, problems with zoos. And I delved into those issues that seemed to call to me. And they were particularly the ones that were blatantly cruel, but still ongoing, which always made me wonder and wonder why, like the Canadian seal hunt or hunting in general, or killing animals for fur. And at that same time, I reached out, and again, I was like in 5th grade to the Fund for Animals in Boston. At that time, they had a very small office off of Tremont Street, and they allowed me during school vacations to come in and volunteer doing little office work. And a woman there had taken me under her wing, which was so very kind and something I will never forget. And she taught me about issues that were important to the Fund for Animals at that time, and how advocacy could also empower me. And I became educated about those issues and what it took to hopefully make some difference for animals. And the next thing I knew, I was in junior high and co-sponsoring anti-trapping legislation and writing politicians about the plights of animals. And at
Wow.
that time, it was kind of a novel thing. They took me into the State House and sat me up front with the speaker. And it was kind of, I mean, in retrospect, it was pretty amazing that they allowed me to do those things and foster me along. It was also writing and learning to write letters politely, but with passion to the different politicians that would hear me and help the plight. I was also greatly influenced by the works about animal ethics and animal rights by Peter Singer and Tom Reagan back there, books like Animal Liberation that I kind of just devoured. And And back in the 70s, though, there weren't a lot of paths for girls interested in working with animals. You could become a vet tech or a groomer or maybe work in a zoo, and a select few could become veterinarians. I was the first in my family to go to college. And so at Northeastern, I studied biology and worked at a few veterinary hospitals when I wasn't in school. And I went to some ecology labs and got experience there. I helped with seal pup rescues at the New England Aquarium. But when I graduated, I was pulled back into a family business that needed my help. So I had a paycheck, but I was really left greatly unfulfilled. I started working a second job at nights and weekends at the Northeast Animal Shelter in Salem right after college. And that allowed me to be in the thick of things, helping animals directly. And by the 90s, I was raising a young family, doing advocacy from the sidelines. But in 2000, when both of my kids were finally in school and doing well, I began volunteering at the MSPCA at Nevins Farm.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
It's a beautiful place.
Mhm.
And I didn't know what I wanted to do there. I just knew that I had to be in the thick of things. And when I was there, I found my passion working with and for animals. And while doing that, I was able to watch this new program that they had where there was a former teacher there who was bringing the people along, for tours that she was creating. And I was learning about kindness and compassion towards people as well as animals. And then I decided that this was a very good fit for me and that this fledgling field had a name, humane education. That's how I found
Right.
the way.
Okay. Marla, that's a remarkable story. It sounds like it wasn't a decision that you made. It was in your DNA somehow, and you just had this. What stands out to me is the mission that you felt, the natural love and affinity that you felt for animals, which grew into a kind of a passionate activism and advocacy, and some kind of precocious adventures and advocacy and being at the State House. I mean, it sounds like this clearly was your destiny. I guess it's the word that comes to my mind. That's a remarkable story. So that's just really wonderful. I think we're all lucky to have you, and the animals are lucky to have you on their side. You mentioned that the field has a name, humane education, and you have a master's degree in that. But I realized when I was reading some things about your background that I wasn't entirely sure. If you go off to get a master's degree in humane education, what can you teach us about what people could expect if they decide, I think I want to get a degree in this field? What kind of things will you wind up studying in a degree on
Sure.
that subject? And what are some of the options for how you apply it then in the work world?
So humane education is a very broad field. I mean, lots of people come to it very secondarily. They could have been teachers, or they could have come like this very long, winding journey that I did. And some other people came to it, after doing work in business. It seems to attract people who have just this. I guess, unharnessed desire and passion for making the world a better place.
Yeah.
So it is broad, and it does cover many different areas of teaching with common threads: kindness, compassion, respect for all living beings, as well as for the environment as a whole. Humane education can also focus. And for example, some humane educators just work on anti-bullying campaigns, or teach about child labor, or global warming. So my focus, of course, is in animal welfare. But while I was working on my master's, I broadened my horizons and scope by learning about these other modules. And the opportunity to study these other areas has made me a more thoughtful and compassionate person. I had always considered myself an animal person up until that point. But by the time I finished, I consider myself, I might be an animal and a people person, which is really necessary to be a good communicator
Right.
with, for the cause, for the plight of
Right.
the animals. The opportunity it was amazing. And through the Institute for Humane Education in Surrey, Maine, I was able to pull in many relevant modules in theory and teaching, and combine them with various welfare modules from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland to
Ah,
create an independent master's conferred by Leslie. I know that the Institute for Education, Humane Education now confers it through a few different universities at this time. But the program, which I completed back in 2006, was what I still describe as decadent and fulfilling, giving both meaning and credibility and direction to what I was doing and what I wanted to do better. So every day I have the opportunity to be with staff and volunteers as well as the public and teach them about the plight of the farm animals
yeah.
and hopefully empower them to make positive changes for the betterment of the animals and for themselves.
Hmm.
Everybody's different and they literally come to the table with different backgrounds, experiences, and ideas. So through our guided sanctuary tours and through the specialized programs that we've developed, like story time tours for very young kids, and our upcoming introduction to animal ethics for middle schoolers, and conversations in animal welfare for ages 15 and up. We're reaching diverse audiences every day. And I like to think that if I can help foster someone along to a kinder, more compassionate place, everybody wins. Each of us,
Absolutely.
each of us can make changes for the better. And I always measure success one person, one animal at a time. When I was very young, I thought I'm gonna scratch my way out onto those ice floes on my belly to put my bodies over those seals, and I'm going to save them and I'm going to save the world. But as I've learned the hard way, as we all do in life, that these things don't move along as quickly as they should or that we hope. So I've learned to temper my my expectations and just reach out and truly measure success one animal at a time, one person at a time.
Well, that makes perfect sense, Marla. And each person and each animal also has a ripple effect, some of which you may find out about, and some of which may be beneath the surface and unseen, but you know that the rippling is happening. So that's really a fascinating story. And thank you for explaining humane education. I had no idea how broad and deep the field was. So that's really interesting to learn about. Well, I wanted to talk particularly about your work at Unity Farm Sanctuary in Sherborn, and tell us something about the kinds of animals who live there and some of the backgrounds that bring them there, and what your role is at this particular sanctuary.
Sure. And as you know, if I live in West Newbury, Sherborn is not an easy hike some days.
No.
Although in COVID era, it's not so bad with my Audible books. But I
Oh,
guess
good.
back in 2018, I had, it was after I had breast cancer and I was
Oh,
housebound for a bit and I wanted to step back into the arena. I was at the MSPCA and I had piloted a few educational programs for the inner city youth in Jamaica Plain, and I loved it. I loved it beyond my wildest expectations, feeling like I gained so much more, maybe even some of the kids those days. But I also crave being outdoors. So while I figured out my next move, I did what all middle-aged women do, and this is what I say: I started following cute animals on Instagram, and that
there's a lot of them.
that's where I saw Dudley, a Scottish Highland bull who was somewhere in I thought, the cool grassy landscape of Scotland, but ended up being months later, not right away, but months later, I discovered he wasn't in Scotland. He was in Sherborn, Mass. And I
No
thought,
way.
that's doable for me.
Yeah.
So I went online and I read about the Young Sanctuary. It had only been there since the December of 16. And I made a call to them with a proposal. If I was allowed to be outside scooping poop, petting animals all day, I would in turn offer to start up their humane education programs. And I soon met with their co-founder and fellow breast cancer survivor, Kathy Halampka, and we immediately hit it off. She's brilliant and kind, generous of spirit. And just like that, I walked into the dream job that I'd been waiting for my entire life. It's essentially a blank slate with all of the opportunities and possibilities to make a real difference with humane education as my platform. So about the sanctuary itself, we're a forever home to over 250 rescued farm animals. And when I say 250, I have to look up, and I look at my watch and the calendar, and I say, well, is that really true? I think over the weekend we may have taken in a few more. So it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 250 to 280 rescued farm animals. We have everybody there from cows to horses and ponies, goats, sheep, llamas, alpaca, pigs, chickens, geese, guinea fowl, turkeys. Many of the animals come from very sad and desperate situations. Some of them are direct rescues from the meat and dairy and egg industries, and
Mm,
other animals have been confiscated by law enforcement officials, while some, like the horses and ponies, are simply unwanted or surrendered. Um, and or abandoned, and sometimes there are reasons that are understandable, Mary, like somebody's sick or they can't afford their
yeah,
animals, the economy has taken a downturn like we
yeah,
have today. Then there are the more questionable reasons, like someone is just tired of taking care of their animals. Maybe they didn't
mm,
think about they're going to have their animal for 15 years,
right,
or
yeah,
yeah, or that it's going to take some effort to make those animals happy and content, so they don't cause some destruction as they're bored. Um, Sometimes animals can't make money for people anymore, like those lesson ponies that we've spoken about. Sometimes ponies don't like to give lessons, and other times they get older and their bodies wear down. And so,
right,
if horses and ponies are healthy, they can live to be, 35 years, maybe longer if they're
yeah,
healthy. So if they're not making money at age 20, do we owe them something after they've made
yeah,
money for them? And I obviously think that we do, but some people think
hmm,
or cannot afford them if they're not
yeah,
going to be making money for them. So we try not to be overly judgmental. We just try and help the animals and
hmm,
teach people as we go along.
yeah,
Um, Also have a lot of older, lots and lots of chickens and birds. And as animals, as they grow older and can't lay eggs at the rapid pace that they were bred to do,
yeah,
we see a lot of animals that either go on to be made into broilers, or people are looking for homes for them.
hmm,
So we have a lot of rehomed birds, as we call them,
yeah,
lots and lots and lots of male roosters, because they
mm,
are just that, males, not egg layers. And
yeah,
I don't know if you know, they make a little bit of noise. So not every town
yes,
enjoys. So we
yeah,
have a lot of reasons that they're there, but many of them come with compromised health, and some of them come with major traumas. So when we take in a new animal, we do with the understanding that we intend to care for them for the rest of their lives, no matter what.
yeah,
So an example is, we took in a sheep last year that we thought had mastitis. She was going to be put down. She had had twins. We said we'd be happy to take the twins for you. They were being raised really kind of to be used for the purpose of training herding dogs. So the herding dogs
mm,
that they were selling were getting like $8,000 to $10,000 each. They really weren't
wow,
interested in the sheep.
yeah,
So when the mom, Lila, had mastitis and couldn't nurse the twins, they didn't want any of them. So we picked up the twins. We're going to bottle feed them, which we did. My bliss, as I always say, bottle feeding. And then when we went to pick them up, they said, well, you can take the mom for $40, or she's going to go to auction, where we don't want any of our animals to end up in that
yeah,
traumatic ending to their lives.
yeah,
So we took Lila, and it wasn't mastitis, but it was a ginormous tumor. Thankfully
oh,
benign, but it took 60 days at Tufts Veterinary Hospital and almost $10,000 to get her
wow,
back to her twins safe and sound.
yeah,
So that's the kind of place that
yeah,
Unity is. When they say, yes, we're taking them on, it's with the knowledge that there are going to be a lot of unexpected issues,
hmm,
and that we will deal with. And we make that commitment to the animal. We will
yeah,
always take care of them.
yeah,
Each of our animals is, we believe, just an individual sentient being who should be entitled to live their own life,
yeah,
free from persecution or
yeah,
pain or without suffering. So those are our animals
yeah.
that we have there.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful, because once an animal makes it to Unity, they are going to be able to live out the rest of their life
Yeah.
as healthy as they can be and as happy as they can be, because you have made the commitment to take care of them, which is a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask you, and thank you for that explanation of the variety of animals and the variety of circumstances that might lead them to be with you. Now, I know, Marla, that this is a little bit like asking a parent who your favorite child is, but I did want to find out, do you have one or two animals that you have a particularly strong feeling for, appreciation for?
Wow. It really depends on who I'm standing in front of, Mary, at any given moment.
Okay. Fair
During
enough.
during our tours, I must say that this is my favorite about 10 times, and each time I truly mean it. I do have an extra special affinity for sheep, and I always have. And then there's my slight obsession with our 22-year-old mini donkey Star, that I adore. She's
Okay.
adorable and a positive delight. But since I've been at Unity, I've developed an even deeper understanding and connection with the many different animals that we have. And I've come to totally appreciate that each one of them is unique, really. And more than their uniqueness of the species as a whole, if that makes sense. Each individual is different and has intrinsic value just because of who they are. And
Yeah.
we have a little belted Galway, a meat breed. It looks like an Oreo for people who don't know cows. Who's named Pal, and he jumped off of a slaughter truck last year. He was only
Oh
6 months
my.
old, and he started running for 3 days.
He
And
made a break for it.
yeah, he made a break for it, and he was really on the run for 3 days, and then we got a call, and to help out. The media had picked it up, which never looks good for anybody chasing a cow around.
Yeah, not a good look.
Yeah. So our
Yeah.
very long-legged and youthful farm manager ran after him and ended up getting him into a pond, and that's how we ended up bringing him to
Oh.
our place. We said, if we get him, we're going to bring him back to Unity. But he was so traumatized at the age of 6 months, he would not approach the fence. He wouldn't hang around with the other cows. He didn't want to meet people for about, I would say, 4 or 5 months.
Wow.
But today he's a well-adjusted, and may I add, a pretty darn cute 1.5-year-old who's a little loud and perhaps even a little demanding of his food on the hour. But he's now comfortable with people and his bovine friends, and he's learned to trust people. And imagine, he was on his way to slaughter, and now he understands and trusts kindness. And
Yeah.
that to me is an amazing and beautiful story, but such a small representation, infinitesimally small number of the animals out there who have to deal with the slaughter, have to deal with the traumas. But we hope that by sharing Pal's story, that people will understand that they can be transformed, and they should be allowed to just be.
Yeah. Well, we were talking before the show started. I do hope to come make a visit to Unity in the
Yes.
fall, and I will very much look forward to meeting this amazing cow. And I'm so glad to hear that had a happy ending.
Yes.
Well, Marla, the other thing that we talked about a little bit on the phone prior to the show, and that I wanted to talk to you about, is an interesting kind of distinction that we humans make between the animals that we keep as pets, particularly cats and dogs, who we refer to and feel love for, their family, and yet very different attitudes toward sheep and cows and chickens and such, whom actually people literally often never see in their live form. I mean that literally, because unless they visit a farm, they just won't have occasion to see them. And those are the animals that we routinely, we eat them. So aside from human beings compartmentalizing these animals in our different categories, are farm animals that different from pets whom we love and see as family members in their range of abilities and emotions?
Mhm. I guess I would say unequivocally the answer is no.
Mm.
For those of us who have always felt very connected to animals, it's not exactly late breaking news. But for others, we now have proof in the science to back up what we already knew.
Yeah.
Animals have deep emotions. They feel just like humans do, just like dogs and cats. So do horses and chickens. And they also comfort each other. Animals even feel empathy towards each other. It is us, the humans, who have conveniently categorized animals for our benefit, so that we can rationalize the suffering that we're all responsible for on some level.
Mm-hmm.
I always say that vegans tend to be, sometimes we're our own worst enemies. Are we vegan enough? And as I say, if you drove to the sanctuary today in a car, you're not 100% vegan either. The glue that's holding your car together came from an animal. So
I did not know that.
yeah, all of us have a responsibility, truly. But taste buds are hard to reason with, but it's possible. Not many of us are raised vegans or vegetarians, but It's a choice that we can all make. And
Mhm.
at the very least, we can all look at the facts of the inhumane treatment of animals and face them. I dare anyone to look into the eyes of our beloved cows and not be moved by the soul of that animal. To turn away is to allow for it to continue. And I just say, do it for the animals, do it for the environment or your own personal health. It doesn't matter, just do it. And to make a choice to change is to work towards a better world for all of us.
Yeah. You know, I do think you mentioned being able to look into the eyes of an animal and be able to see the intelligence and the emotions and to make a connection with the animal through your eyes, soul to soul, so to speak. And I do think part of the challenge is that people don't routinely actually have the opportunity to have those kind of engagements with farm animals. You know, I used to work at Drumlin Farm in Lincoln, which is an Audubon sanctuary. And the people who left that property to Audubon, the Hathaway family, made it a stipulation of their bequest that it would continue to be a working farm because they felt strongly that children had lost connection with where food comes from. It's just stuff that's packaged in the grocery store. And in my work as a field teacher there, often hosting children from inner city schools, farm animals were a revelation to them. They had never encountered one before. And so I think that's part of the challenge there as well, that we really have, we're urban creatures now, and we don't always get out to farms. And so I think it's even more important that you have a place like your sanctuary where people can go and take a tour and have the opportunity to make contact, to look an animal in the eye and to realize, as you were just being so eloquent about, that they are fellow sentient beings on planet Earth. And then we have choices to make. The challenge is the more we know, the more we have to make choices because you
Mhm.
won't be able to just not think about it anymore. So thank you for that, Marla. That was really interesting and well put. I know that the Farm Sanctuary has a project, they call it the Someone Project, because the idea is that the more you learn about animals' emotional and cognitive abilities, the more they become not things, but someone that you're sharing the planet with. Um, so I wanted also to ask you, with there has been, in addition to growth and research about the cognitive and emotional abilities and lives of farm animals, there's been a lot of ethological studies of dolphins and elephants and chimps. And sometimes it seems as though that research proving that these animals from the wild, really have abilities that are very similar to human abilities. They seem to have gained more traction in some ways in helping people pay attention, make donations, fund them, than similar research with similar findings about farm animals. And I wanted to ask you why you think that is.
That's a good point, isn't it? I think it's easy to want to look at saving animals that we don't use, quote unquote. I
Yeah,
mean, not many of us are using a tiger or a
yeah,
panda or a dolphin.
yeah.
We don't use them for our own daily purposes. Dolphins, elephants, chimps, they've all been considered higher level mammals. And because of their wildness or proven intelligence or beauty, and quite frankly, distance from our plates.
Hmm.
By
Yeah,
not eating them, we've elevated them somehow. And in my opinion, that's not the real problem. The problem is that we think we have the right to classify and select which
yeah,
animals are worthy or not. But all animals should be elevated, appreciated, and respected, kind of like the Someone project that you mentioned at Farm Sanctuary, and the work that those reports back up. The chimp and the pig and the dolphin and the duck, the elephant and the sheep, they all deserve legal protection, but not all of them receive it.
yeah,
We as humans tend to decide which ones are worthy and which ones are not. And I
yeah,
don't believe that we have the right to do that.
yeah. Yeah, well put. Thank you, Marla. Well, I know that you have another specialty besides your work with the farm sanctuary. You're also a specialist in helping people grieve the loss of their pets. And I was hoping that you could tell us why this specialty is needed and what kind of support you provide people.
Sure. It's almost like something that I've naturally done my whole life, only because I think that if we have suffered the loss of a pet, we understand that.
Yeah,
Not everybody has suffered to those depths and levels. But our society differentiates between grieving for people and grieving for a beloved pet. So for many of us who have loved an animal deeply, we can feel especially vulnerable when we know that others don't understand the depths of our suffering and are perhaps even judgmental. But grief is grief just as love is love. And without emotional support, those who suffer can get stuck in processing a loss. Finding that emotional support for a loss or an anticipated loss is not always easy. So sometimes we need the help of others to guide us through the pain and move us through our grief. And ultimately, unresolved feelings can plunge us into despair and depression. I think we all know that. And they can manifest as physical ailments. But everybody's different, as each animal is different. And the relationships that we share with our beloved pets are each quite unique. So it's about kindness, compassion, connection. It's not that difficult. It's the same mission I speak about at Unity. So I'm always happy to help guide people in whatever way that I can. We talk to very young children all the way through adults and even seniors who are forced to give up their pets or have lost their pets in that particular way. It's all loss. People who are at assisted living homes or nursing homes, and just being able to talk to people and help them understand and frame things that is something that they can live with and cope with is, I believe, to be a mutual gift that we can share.
Yeah, well put. Yeah, I mean, I know that it's a depth of loss, and I think you're right. If you haven't had a pet, in my case, it's dogs. I'm a great dog lover. It can be hard to fathom the absolute depth and the enduring depth of the loss. They share pretty much every minute of every day. Our lives are totally intertwined with them because they depend upon us for everything, and they give so much love back. And they're really better listeners than most people, And so it sounds like a large part of what you do is really help people both validate their emotions and just be able to talk it out. And that sounds enormously helpful. Well, Marla, this has been wonderful. I've learned so much from you. I'm really glad. Thank you on behalf of all the people and all the animals for your being out there doing this important work. Now, if people wanted to find you for your pet loss work, how can they find you, and how can they get more information about the sanctuary?
Sure. So for as far as the pet loss, you can always reach out to me at education@unityfarmsanctuary.org. And to learn about the sanctuary itself, it's unityfarmsanctuary.org, where we're always updating our tour schedules and happenings at the sanctuary, and developing a website that'll actually help people who want to make a move towards going more plant-based. We'll be having that up this fall as well, we hope. So I'm really grateful for your time, Mary, and the audience, and the platform which to speak about my passion and bliss.
Well, it's clearly your passion in business, and clearly this was your destiny from a very early age. Thank you so much, Marla. It's been a joy to talk to you. I've learned so much, and I really appreciate your taking the time to visit the morning show. Thank you so much.
Take care. See you soon. Bye now.
Well, let's welcome our next guest then. Can we bring Jenny Fielding on screen? Jenny Fielding is coordinator of library services at Northern Essex Community College, their Lawrence campus. She worked previously at Fitchburg State University. She's authored numerous articles on information literacy and has a master's degree in library science from Southern Connecticut State University. She participates in NECC Speakers Bureau, for whom she developed the presentation, part of which she'll share with us today, with the great title, Think Like a Fact Checker. So Jenny, welcome. Thank you so much for coming to visit the morning show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this and to talk about, information literacy to the wider audience. So I really appreciate you reaching out. I appreciate the NECC's Speakers Bureau for giving me this opportunity as well. So thank you.
Well, my pleasure. I couldn't be more timely. So I was delighted to have you.
It's a very
be able to come now. Well, in fact, let's start there. Why is it so important for all of us to learn how to think like fact checkers in evaluating news sources these days?
Well, it's a matter of understanding sort of where we are as a society, right? So when we're looking for information, I'm of the generation where there's sort of a pre-internet and post-internet, right? We can remember that there was editorial control and fact checkers who worked to make sure that the information we were getting had at least gone through some sort of process before
Right.
we consumed that information. You think about a newspaper or broadcast news, et cetera. The internet shifted that significantly, and it's been a seismic change. And it's been something that we've come to rely on without really understanding how it works in many ways. And so now we are literally living in an information saturated environment. We carry
That's
around little computers in our
right.
pockets that we
Right.
constantly are accessing for all kinds of information. And so being able to discern, especially as the internet has become far more sophisticated and far more active in collecting information and shaping our online experience, it's important for us to be more proactive in understanding, A, where's it coming from, but B, then how do we evaluate it for credibility, reliability? In higher ed, that means helping students find sources to create research projects and to investigate the content in their discipline. But for your average person, we have information tasks all the time. Somebody we know is perhaps diagnosed with a condition. We need good information in that
Right.
situation. Our landlord is doing something that we're not entirely sure is legal. We need good information in that
Right.
situation. We want to know what's happening in the world. We need good information
Right.
in that situation. So it's not just a research-based thing, and information literacy is a discipline that's often taught in higher ed as a research-based discipline, but it's really hugely interdisciplinary. It touches
Yeah.
every piece of our lives,
Yeah.
whether we're researching, quote unquote, or not.
Yeah.
So I think it's incredibly important for people to understand how this information environment actually works and what they can do to
Right.
actively get better information.
Right. And to develop and have then some tools on hand in order to
Absolutely.
be able to make the assessment about whether this is actually good information or questionable information. So
Right.
along those lines, I know that there is, because I read an article you wrote on this, which is very interesting.
Thank
And
you.
it's called the Currency, Reliability, Authority, Accuracy, and Purpose Method, puckishly abbreviated to CRAAP. You can pronounce that for yourself at home. So could you tell us a little bit about this method, Jenny?
I sure can. So back in the day, and I'm going to use that phrase, when the internet was new, some folks out at Cal State Chico, some librarians out there, again, in higher ed, we help people use sources. And
Right.
so we noticed that students were starting to use web-based sources. And this was back when web-based sources acted a little bit more like print sources. They were semi-discrete. They often went to extensive trouble to post, their mission, their purpose, who was contributing, et cetera. So they were a little more static. They certainly weren't the same kinds of sources that we're looking at now. And so we created a rubric, which is essentially a checklist. And so to put it succinctly, the acronym, and it has stuck, is how to tell if a source is crap.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Right.
Yeah, you'll remember it.
It was something that our students would remember. And so
Yeah.
each thing and each individual assessment, you would take a deep dive into a site. You would do a
Yeah.
close reading of the site itself, because again, in higher ed, that's how we glean meaning. You want to do a close reading of a text to understand it well. So that was the method we used back in the early 2000s. To evaluate a website. Take a look at the About Us section, look at the contributors. Do they have any research posted? Do they have links out to other information that verifies what they're talking about? So currency, how reliable, we've all been out to sites that haven't been updated in a decade.
Yes, that's for sure.
Relevance. We've all done a Google search where stuff that isn't what we really wanted showed up. So how relevant is it to my query? Authority, who wrote it? Do they have any standing in this particular field? Accuracy, do they provide additional sources to verify their claims? And then purpose, point of view, is it designed to sell me something? Is it designed to convince me of something? Is it designed to inform me of something? So we would look at a site, we would do that deep dive into that site and use the checklist to evaluate how useful we felt that information might be. And it has stood the test of time. Even today, in a more sophisticated online environment, each one of those assessments is still useful. The problem is it's not adequate. Now
Okay.
that
All right.
now that the way information is communicated online and created online, as we all are creating an online experience together, which we'll talk about as we move
Mm-hmm.
on, and
Yeah.
it's not enough anymore.
Yeah.
And so we need to be thinking more broadly.
So the deep dive is good as far as it goes, but from what you're saying, it's not sufficient anymore.
Precisely.
We need other tools. And I know one of those tools you talked about in the article is called I think it's called the lateral reading method.
Yes.
And I was hoping you could talk to us about what this lateral method is and whether it produces more adequate results.
Absolutely. So some really wonderful researchers out at Stanford and Stanford History Education Group did a study a couple years ago. And the primary researchers were Sam Weinberg and Sarah McGrew. And they basically took a group, they wanted to test this idea in this larger context information world. How well are we actually pedagogically teaching people to assess information? And so they took a group of students, you know, first semester college students. They took a group of faculty who you would think would be far more information savvy. And then they took a group of fact checkers. And essentially they gave them a set of sites and said, and they basically just said, evaluate these sites for us. Tell us if you think this information is good or bad. And what they found was that the fact checkers outperformed significantly both the students and the faculty.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Precisely because the faculty were doing what faculty do, what we teach our students to do, the deep dive, a close reading, right? Because that is how, when you're dealing with a text, you very often get meaning. And so they would go through this sort of rubric kind of thing. They would look very closely at the site itself, the about us, the contact, the mission, et cetera, what we've talked about. So the fact checkers, however, immediately barely looked at the site at all and immediately opened a new tab and started Googling the organization itself, or the president of the organization, or the contributor who wrote the article. They would look at things like, is it considered biased or slanted? What are news sites saying about it? What is Wikipedia saying about this organization? They would look at, if they could find it, what are their funding sources?
Interesting. Very interesting.
Where is the money coming from for this think tank, this organization? Are they recognized by other organizations in the field? Because it's very easy to just create a website that looks official.
Just make stuff up.
Just make stuff up. And so, and that's sort of the highest level of information manipulation, but it is. And very often it's about who's funding it as to what purpose or point of view they're communicating. And so the fact checkers immediately started using external sources. They would pop open another tab on their browser, which is why it's lateral reading rather than vertical reading.
Yes, right.
And start to Google them. And they would look deep into the results too. They wouldn't necessarily take that first result as the most accurate result. And so that strategy of really just skimming the site itself, but then independently verifying where it's coming from was a far more reliable strategy. And the Stanford History Education Group has put together a curriculum around this called Civic Online Reasoning, which is a marvelous curriculum that, again, interdisciplinarily, these have typically been the milieu of librarians teaching information literacy, but a history group has done this really wonderful work too. So there's a lot of work happening by a number of organizations that are looking at how we can do this better.
You know, as you describe the method, it makes perfect sense. And yet, if you've been trained, for example, as a traditional academic, you might be more inclined to start with the deep dive and think that that was adequate. But it's no longer adequate given, as you were referencing before, and I want to talk about that next, how the online environment and the internet have been evolving. And in fact, there are things that librarians, such as yourself and fact checkers, know about how online sources are organized and presented that a casual consumer of information might not be fully aware of. And I was hoping that you could help us understand a little bit better what are the caveats that we should have in mind about how the information that we're seeing that might come up for us initially is actually organized, and how are they using as our information that they gather on us while we're looking for information to shape the way things are presented.
Yeah. So something that I think is important to understand, and I think many people understand this sort of on some back burner level, right? But it's that data collection is happening invisibly and constantly.
Mm.
So everything that we do online is shaping our online experience.
Mm.
And a good way and this is something that I often do in my classes when I'm teaching my students, is I say that there's no such thing as an objective Google search. If you and I search for the same thing using exactly the same terminology, but we're on our own devices, we're going to get entirely different results. And the
Wow, that's
reason
really interesting.
it's fascinating. And the reason for
Yeah.
that is because we have different search histories. We've
Right.
gone to different news sites. We've friended different people on Facebook. We follow different people on Instagram. Everything that we're doing, that data collection is constantly happening in the digital world. Like I said, we carry around a little GPS in our pockets all the time. And so Google Maps knows where we are at all times. It feels a little Orwellian, but these are the kinds of things that keep librarians up at night.
Yeah.
So,
and we appreciate that.
but it does, it shapes what we're doing. And so, and we very quickly get to a place, and everything that is happening, I think we've all had that experience where we've searched for something on Google, and then we go to a social media feed and an ad appears for it immediately. And it's a kind of unsettling, like, how did they know I was interested in that? And the reason is because that data collection is happening all the time, and it's shaping our online experience. What we buy, what we put in our Amazon cart and don't buy, what we share, what we like, what news sites we go to, all of that is being tracked in aggregate for the most part, right? And then what we search for next is based on what we've already looked for. So that initial ranking that we receive from a Google search isn't necessarily accurate in any way.
Interesting.
And yet we as people, as humans, and this is a human psychological phenomenon, if I hand you a list of 10 things, right? Whether I say, even if I inform you this is an entirely random list, you will immediately start to ascribe more weight to the thing that's listed first.
Yes.
It's a very human thing to do.
Yeah.
Even if I tell you it's random, even if I tell you
right.
there's no actual weight, that I didn't give it any priority, you're going to pay more attention to the things at the top of the list, which is why very often what we see, and one of the things that I try to discourage in my students is Google and go, right? You just type it in, take the first thing, and off you go. Because Google knows that we behave that way. And so first is best psychologically. So what is first in the list is what we often ascribe the most weight to. But fact checkers and people who work in information literacy like I do understand that's not actually true at all. The best information might be buried 2, 3, 10, 100 pages deep, but we don't have the patience or the ability to really dig down that way. So understanding that what we're doing shapes what we see, creates this sort of, interestingly enough, the internet was and has given, voice to many people who didn't have a place in that editorialized gatekeeping situation, but it also has opened the door for literally anybody. And we should think about all the anybodies we know, the people whose opinions we respect and the people who we maybe fight with over Thanksgiving dinner, so all those anybody's now have the ability to put information out there. And so it becomes even more critical in understanding how it's ranked or not really ranked. It's ranked on popularity and it's ranked on your previous activity, and digging into how we're thinking about that information before we ascribe any weight to it. And that's a difficult psychological prospect.
It is, but I'm so glad that you're explaining that to us, because it makes perfect sense, what you describe. And the example of a list of 10 things brings it home, because we do that. But knowing about it, then we have the opportunity then to, with awareness, try to work against the natural bias, and counter our instinct to think that first on the list is most important or most credible, not because it ain't necessarily so, as the song says. Well, now there's a phrase, and I know you mentioned it in your article. I know it's very well known by people more conversant with the internet than I am, but I hadn't seen the phrase filter bubble effect. Could you say a little bit more about the filter? And there's a book about the filter bubble effect, I think, that's very well known, but it was the first time I had encountered it when I was reading it. So, and I think it sounds really interesting and related to what you're saying. Could you explain the filter bubble effect to us?
Sure. So the filter bubble effect, the book is called The Filter Bubble, or How the New Personalized Web is Changing What We Read and How We Think. And Eli Pariser wrote this book back in 2011. But what he talked about in that book has actually, the trends that he discusses are exponentially seen as the internet has even grown. So some of his specific examples are dated to that time, but the underpinning idea of it is just as important as it was then. And what that means is there's essentially a filter bubble that we create for ourselves online. Some of it is conscious. So we choose who to follow, for instance, on social media, right? We very often choose to follow people who are like-minded. And so for obvious reasons, again, psychological reasons, we feel comfortable in a place where people are agreeing with what we're saying. To sit in a place where people are disagreeing is uncomfortable, and social media is, social media is social media. So we tend to curate, right, our own experience where we can. But in addition to that is what we were talking about earlier, that other things are being curated for us invisibly behind the scenes. YouTube is a perfect example. You watch a video, for instance, and based on the video you watch, it'll automatically suggest or start playing the next video, whether you chose it or not, right? Based on what you've previously watched. And it's very easy to see how people can go down, and we've all gone down the YouTube rabbit hole where suddenly we're watching 80s music videos that we haven't seen. And
yes.
But there are other types of rabbit holes that you can go down to as well, right? So flat earth is a perfect example of this, right? If somebody says it, then it holds more weight. And then if there's another video that says the same thing, then that must also have some weight. And we can very easily sort of shape an online experience that confirms our own biases by continuing to click on, by continuing to seek out. And the more we seek out a particular point of view, the more that point of view percolates to the top of our search results. So it becomes this self-feeding cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. It self-reinforces.
Exactly.
In real time.
In real time, exactly.
Yeah.
And again, it's not just YouTube, because they're all talking to each other. They're all connecting your information across platforms, right? So your Alexa, your Siri, your car are tracking information on you, and all of that is being collected, aggregate, and brokered through these large data platforms, which is why when you search something on Google, you see the ad for it on your Instagram, but it also can really shape the kind of information you get. And I think that's part of the reason why we find ourselves in a very polarized atmosphere, is that it's very easy on the internet, on our feeds, on our phones, to only see things that reinforce our already staked out position.
Right.
And we're not seeing a balanced view because the search engines, our social media, all the ways we get information are feeding us something similar to what we've already searched for and already believe.
Right. Oh, that's fascinating, Jenny. It is kind of Orwellian, but you bring the power of awareness to it, which is our best tool, it strikes me, to be able to create, to break through the bubble. And I think the bubble is a good image. Well, I did want to ask a very timely question, because recently we've all been learning about numerous news reports, or at least in my filter bubble, about Russian and other foreign manipulation of the United States social media platforms to try and influence our elections this fall. And I wanted to ask you, is there a way to detect whether a news feed or a site is being run by or influenced by foreign actors with their own political agenda?
It's very hard to tell, and it's very hard to tell for a long list of reasons. One is that these types of malicious actors are very good at hiding what they're doing, and there are folks who have far more technical knowledge than me that can talk about where sites are generated and how that how you can look at an account. But it is a real problem. The Guardian, for instance, put out an article in February of this year that cited a study that talked about, they analyzed a Twitter feed around climate change, for instance, and they found that roughly, by their estimation, a quarter of all the tweets on that feed were generated by bots.
Interesting.
As opposed to actual humans. And bots, for anybody who doesn't know, is just a small algorithmic program that is programmed to, if it senses or if it notices a phrase like climate change, to reply immediately with canned text, so to speak.
Yeah.
And often that text is incendiary and divisive and gets people arguing as opposed to talking. And
Yeah.
so that sort of thing, particularly we see it on Twitter all the time, that sort of influence can degrade the discourse, which again puts us in these polarized places, which makes it easier for us to be manipulated by information. The propaganda that we would think of, right? When we think of propaganda, us pre-internet folk, we think about, leaflets and broadcasts and
Yes,
all
that's
of
right.
that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, right? But propaganda now is more a strategy of what they call flooding the zone, which is essentially putting out so much information that there's a sort of hopelessness that comes in going, can we determine if anything is true? What's the point?
Yeah.
And this is a fine line that I try to walk with my students in class is, the difference between skepticism and cynicism. And we're trying to teach people to be skeptical of information, but that there is real good factual information. That's how science works, right?
Yeah.
We get the best information that we have, we agree on some facts, and then with that information, we ask better questions to get more information.
Right.
But if the zone, so to speak, and the zone is our information environment, is flooded with all kinds of garbage, everything from good information to absolute disinformation, people tend to throw up their hands and say, nothing's true. And that's also a damaging place to land.
It is. Yeah.
Damaging for research, damaging for our civil discourse. And so being able to discern, the best tools are the ones that we're talking about. It's creating this mindset, this skeptical mindset, to not take the first thing as best, to independently verify something before we share it, because even the act of sharing it is propagating information, right? So verifying before sharing, and using these strategies, because there are technical ways, and again, we have cybersecurity departments that do that work, but for your average citizen, the easiest thing to do is simply to pause, stop for a second, look at how quickly did that reply come up. Did it come up faster than a human could type it? Is it deliberately fomenting, divisiveness in the discourse? Is it deliberately trying to inflame people's opinions, as opposed to, we were having a perfectly nice conversation about this, and now this person has interjected into the conversation and we're all yelling at each other. So a lot of it is just taking those moments to look at our online information the same way we might look at information if a person was sitting in front of us. And that's a difficult thing to do.
It is, but it's a possible thing to do. And so what I love about what you're saying is you've identified the problem, that the skepticism, the fine line between skepticism and cynicism exists. But what I love about your approach, Jenny, is that you're providing people with tools that they can use to feel empowered, to be able to move into a filter bubble and dismantle the bubble, and also to have some tactics to use. I love the idea of the lateral checking out, instead of just doing the deep dive, but to begin sort of consulting other sources and see how it all stacks up. So it's very empowering. I so appreciate your coming on the show to talk about this. It's such an important topic, and you speak about it with such clarity and effectiveness. So thank you for that. You have reinforced my sense that librarians should rule the world, and have
well,
superpowers, the superpower of knowledge.
I won't disagree.
No, nor should you have to, because you do have superpowers. So thank you so much, and it's been just delightful and such an education to talk to you. I so appreciate your taking the time to visit the morning show. It's been just very enlightening. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much for the opportunity. And again, I'd like to thank the NECC Speakers Bureau for allowing me the time to do this. And I hope you have a great day. And thank you so much for having me on the program.
Thank you, Jenny. It's been a joy to have you. Okay, take care.
Bye
Well, that's it for today's show, everybody. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll join us next Thursday on the morning show, when I'm going to be pleased to welcome back to the show author Eric J. Dolan to talk about his newly released and fascinating book, A Furious Sky, the 500-year history of America's hurricanes. Eric was on the show last year to talk about his excellent history of pirates, black flags, and blue waters. Not only is his research always impeccable and extensive, lucky for us, he's also an extraordinarily gifted storyteller, able to make his material come alive. So if you missed any part of today's show, it'll be available for viewing on the Port Media YouTube channel playlist for the morning show, www.ncmhub.org. Just click on the YouTube icon and look for playlists. Each show will also air on WJOP, that's FM 96.3 on Friday at 8 a.m. and then again the following Tuesday at 4 p.m. and Wednesday at 3 p.m. and will be available then as a podcast on the SoundCloud. Again, just go to www.ncmhub.org, click on the cloud icon, and then scroll down. Thank you so much for watching today, everybody. Please join us again next Thursday at 9 a.m. to learn about the history of hurricanes with Eric J. Dolan. That's it for now. Bye-bye.